The Gettysburg Address is arguably the most famous speech in American history. There's a popular myth that Lincoln hastily wrote the speech while riding on the train from Washington, D.C. to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That myth is not true. Lincoln was a wordsmith, and when he was going to speak, he was very careful to get the words just right. Now, before you hear this speech, the context of the speech is very important. Lincoln was invited to give a few short remarks at a ceremony commemorating a national cemetery being constructed at the site just outside the small town of Gettysburg in southern Pennsylvania. 4 months earlier, the climactic battle of the Civil War took place over 3 days. Nearly 8,000 soldiers were killed in 3 days, and nearly 30,000 suffered wounds. The carnage is almost hard to fathom. They said that the stench from Gettysburg could be smelled 60 miles away. So, these soldiers were going to be buried right on the battlefield. So picture President Lincoln coming to Gettysburg and walking among the freshly dug graves of thousands of soldiers. Huge crowds gathered that day to be at the commemoration. One other personal note, I always like to remind students of this. In February of 1862, Lincoln's 12-year-old son Willie had died of typhoid fever, and Lincoln was still grieving over that terrible tragedy. It's a pretty heart-wrenching thing to imagine what he was thinking about that day. Now, why has this speech had such resonance in our history? It's only 3 minutes long, contains 272 words. Even in the foreign world, the speech is famous. I had an exchange student a few years back named Sitala Ratanamali from Indonesia. And even she had heard the Gettysburg Address before she came to America. Why is it such an important speech? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. I suppose the main thing that historians talk about is the idea that Lincoln was, in many respects, redefining and enlarging the idea of freedom in the speech. He took the language of the Declaration of Independence, the radical language that all men are created equal, and he put that in the center of our thinking. 77 years ago, that equals 87 years. 1863 minus 87 is 1776. He made that the founding document of the nation, and not the Constitution. Listen now as one of your classmates, Zane Dukes, reads the powerful speech. Listen to the words and imagine that you're standing at Gettysburg on November 19th, 1863.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives so that this nation may live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, and we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.